Hello, it's great to see you. If you're viewing this video, then you've been surfing the World Wide Web and a great big beautiful wave is taking you to the City of Burlington's website. It's full of fun and interesting activities. This is not likely to be one of them, but I will do my best. Thank you so much for inviting me into your homes. My name is Michael. I've been fortunate enough to be the chef at the Burlington Senior Center for the last 5 years or so. I've also taught a class called the Culture of Food at the Center for a couple of years. It's a class that focuses on demonstration, discussions, recipe sharing. It's a lot of fun. Each class runs about 2 hours. This class is going to be a mini version of that. About 10 minutes or so of a demonstration. I'm so glad to be joining you in the comfort of your home. The best part is there's no mess to clean up afterwards for you. So I get asked often to share recipes, and I'm quite flattered every time. It's the ultimate validation that people liked what you just cooked for them. Don't get me wrong, recipes are important for the home kitchen and professional kitchens. In fact, they're critical for restaurants. They help the operators and the chefs there to maintain consistency along with quality and cost controls. But at home, you and I have the ability to do whatever we want in the kitchen within reason. Sometimes recipes hinder creativity. I always say techniques and confidence are much more valuable for us home cooks. Let the recipe kind of be your guide, but ultimately good technique is going to take you where you want to go. So our technique today that we're focusing on is pan searing, which is done over high heat in a hot pan in order to seal in the juices of our product. It can be like a chicken breast or a duck breast or a piece of fish or some scallops or a nice 6-ounce strip loin steak, or in this case we're going to use some center cut pork loin, boneless. Sometimes if your product is thin enough, you could be able to cook it all the way through in the pan. If it's a little bit thicker, usually with a chicken breast, maybe you might put it in a 365-degree oven or so, just to let it cook through completely. But either way, you'll want to get a instant read thermometer to temp it and know where you're at. So the dish that we're going to make today is the pan-seared pork with mushroom tarragon sauce. You can serve it over a bed of buttered egg noodles, or you can serve it over rice or risotto. You could have it with a small salad or some asparagus if you're going keto, or you could have it just by itself, no side at all. The mushrooms and the sauce is plenty filling. So the ingredients for our dish are the pork loin. We have some cremini mushrooms. We have a medium shallot. And people will say, what's a medium shallot? Well, it's larger than a small shallot and smaller than a large shallot. 1 clove of garlic, some chicken stock, and you can use the chicken bouillon, you can use the chicken pots, you can use the chicken that comes in the in a little Tetra box, or certainly you could make your own chicken stock. Any one of those work just fine. We're going to have some lemon juice, we're going to have a little bit of chopped tarragon, and we've got 3 tablespoons of butter. And I know that that sounds like a lot of butter, and that's because it is. But like Julia Child always said, if you are afraid of butter, then you could always use cream. And so we're going to use a little bit of that too. We've got a little bit of olive oil for our searing, and we've got salt and pepper to taste. We also want to make sure that we're going to pat dry our pork chops or our steak or our chicken or whatever we're cooking with a little bit of paper towel, because moisture is the enemy to browning. So we definitely want to make sure that that's done beforehand. So we're going to mince our shallots. You want a relatively sharp knife. I usually like to cut it across lengthwise like that and remove our peel. And then cut lengthwise again and again, and then we have our little mince. It doesn't have to be too finely minced, but you just want it chopped up a little bit. I prefer shallots over, say, regular cooking onions, just because they seem to have a little bit more sweetness, and they seem to last a little bit longer. I find you put them in the bottom of the fridge and they'll last for a little while. And they also come in the right size if you're cooking for one or two, as opposed to having to chop up a whole large onion. A shallot is almost like a little mini onion for you. So that's pretty good. Good enough. We'll put it aside. And then you want to mince your garlic. So I like to use the knife flat and then just pound it with your hand like that. That should separate the peel out for you. And then there's a little tough spot right there that I usually like to get out, and then let's give it a little thump and a quick mince. Again, it doesn't have to be too fine. You can take the back of your knife and just kind of give it a little smear or smush like this, and that helps crush it down a little bit more, releases out some of that extra garlic flavor. And then in with the shallot. We're going to do our mushrooms. Now, it depends. Sometimes if the stems are a little bit woody, you can remove them. These are actually not too bad, but you just want a quick slice, thin slice. And I'm adding it to my bowl of already mostly chopped mushrooms. These are creminis, but you could use just a regular white mushroom, a button mushroom. You could use a larger portobello. Any of them work fine. So we want to make sure that we salt and pepper our pork, and I'm using a little bit of kosher salt. I prefer to use the kosher salt over the table salt because you can see that the grains are a little bit bigger. You can actually see what you're putting on the product. It takes longer for it to dissolve in. So people think, oh, look at that, this looks so large, it's just going to be so salty. But the truth is you over salt when you can't see what you're doing. And you can't see what you're doing when the grains of salt are really so tiny. So with this, you can hold it up, let it fall on the product. You can see what's actually on there. It makes a lot more sense. And then a little bit of fresh pepper on top. And as you can see, I'm kind of patting it in as I'm doing it. So not only am I pushing in the seasoning, but I'm also picking up any excess moisture that's on there. Okay. Okay, so we're over at the stove now, and you want medium high heat. You want fairly high heat, and what I usually do, I wouldn't recommend this at home, but what I do is I'll touch the pan just to make sure that it's hot, and it is scorching hot. So I'm going to add in my olive oil, and I'm going to add in butter. And you say, well, why are you adding in both? Well, because we really want the flavor of the butter, but butter has a smoke point of 350 degrees. Which means it's not going to take long for it to brown and burn. Oil has a smoke point, olive oil, of about 400 to 450 degrees. So that brings up the overall smoke point of our fat to somewhere in the 385, 390 degree range, right? So we get the flavor of the butter, but not having to worry about it burning too quick and ruining our product. I put a little score in there, you can see in the fat, just so that when the pork hits the pan, it's not going to curl up. You notice how that happens sometimes. So that happens with a steak. It can happen with the pork. So if you put a little cut like that, it should prevent that from happening. Going to put our pork in. And now we're looking for a really good sear on that. It should take a couple of minutes each side. And when I'm done, I'm going to take a look with my thermometer and temp it and see what temperature we're at. For pork, you're looking at around 155 to 160 degrees. I know in the old days they said you had to cook pork to like 180, 190, mostly because of trichinosis, but there hasn't been a case of trichinosis in Canada in decades, so it's not a concern for us anymore. The pork that our farmers produce is top-notch, good quality stuff. At the same time, you want it cooked, but 160 is certainly more than enough. So I'm going to take a look, and if we patted our pork properly, and if we had our pan hot enough, we should have some pretty decent browning. One trick to know for sure is that when you're searing something, anything, if it's sticking to the bottom of the pan, it's not ready to be turned, right? That's one indicator. Or if you're grilling, let's say outside, and your steak is sticking The reason why is because it's not ready to be turned over. It'll let you know when it easily separates away. And see there, it's done that. So you can see the nice caramelization, nice browning. And we'll flip it over to the other side. You can see these are kind of fairly thick cut. So they're going to need an extra little bit of time. Like I said, either in the oven. The other option is to just put it back into the sauce and let it sort of simmer in that finished sauce for a little bit. And that'll do the trick as well. This is just a little bit of basting. I'm just covering the top with this butter and oil just for extra flavor, to keep the top moist as the bottom is cooking through. And it also looks pretty cool. Now, at home, you'll get used to doing this, but you'll see chefs do it all the time, is they'll just sort of take their finger and they'll press into it and see how much give is there. Usually they'll do it for a piece of steak or anything, but I do it with everything. I do it with if I'm searing scallops, if I'm searing pork or chicken. It's just touching it to see how much resistance there is. If your finger kind of smushes right into it, then obviously you know it's nowhere near being done. But by touching it, you can feel that resistance, that springiness. And that resistance is telling me that these are getting closer and closer to being done. They're not quite there yet, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we don't overdo the bottom. Let's take a quick peek at the bottom right now. Looks pretty good. Looks good. So I got my plate here. I'm going to take these guys out and I'm going to rest them on this plate. And I'm just going to cover that with a little bit of tin foil. And that foil is also going to help them to sort of keep cooking as well. In the same pan, I've got my mushrooms. I'm going to add them all in. These are the creminis that we sliced up. And I want to add a little bit of my salt and pepper to that. Not too much. The other thing too is that you don't want to over salt anything, because as you're cooking along, the salt is going to intensify as you're beginning to make your sauce. And you don't want things to be over salty. That's why if you're using your chicken stock, I would recommend you use a little bit of the low sodium or no sodium chicken stocks that they have available now. Of course, if you're making your own at home, you never want to add salt to your own chicken broth anyhow, so that's not a concern. Let's see, these mushrooms are going to cook down fairly quick, fairly high heat. Now I'm going to add in my shallots and my garlic. I could have added them in at the start. You could add them in now. There's always a worry that the shallot and the garlic is going to burn when you first put it in the pan, because the pan is so screeching hot. So a good trick is to put the mushrooms in, bring the temperature of the pan down a little bit. You see it already starts to release all of their moisture, and so that prevents the shallot and the garlic from burning in the bottom of the pan. But I can still smell, you can't, but I can smell the shallots and the garlic cooking very, very nicely with the mushrooms. It smells really good right now. It's not necessary to brown the mushrooms. They don't have to be. The browner they get, the more intense they're going to get, obviously. But at the same time, you just want them sort of cooked through. And we're still going over medium-high heat. I want to add in now my chicken stock. And I want to turn the heat up just a little bit, because now I really want this to start going. And while I'm doing that, I'm curious. I'm going to temp my pork chops to see where they're at. As I say, they're not likely to be done at this point, but they're going to be pretty close, and I'm going to put them in the sauce to continue cooking. This is my instant read thermometer. You can see those juices already collecting there. We're going to add that back in because that's a nice flavor. So try to get it so that it's in the center of your product. And there you can see I'm reading about 136, 137 it's going to get to. And remember, we want this to be about 160. So it's pretty close. As it continues to rest, the temperature is going to rise up. But in the meantime, I'm just going to go ahead and add back these beautiful juices. Don't want to waste those. That's all flavor. These are going to continue to rise. They're going to get to about 140, 142. And then we'll put them back into the sauce, and that'll bring them all the way up to the 155, 160 that we're looking for. I'm going to go ahead and add in my cream, 35%. Not going to worry about salt and pepper at this point, but I'm going to taste the sauce in a minute. I'm going to add in my tarragon. You could use dried or fresh. This is actually a combination of both. Tarragon has that sort of anisey licorice flavor, and it grows really, really easily for all of you home gardeners. Does not take much to have it grow. You can put a small pot in the backyard and doesn't really require very much attention at all. It can grow fairly wild fairly quickly. And then the lemon juice, I always like to add just a little squeeze of lemon juice to these sauces. I think it just brightens it up a little bit, cuts some of the richness down, but at the same time sort of intensifies all the flavors. Okay, so now I'm going to add our pork back to the sauce and any other juices that have collected. And I want to kind of cover pork with that sauce and with the mushrooms. It's only going to take a few minutes longer from here. In the meantime, you could have your pasta boiling, your noodles if you're serving that as a side dish, or your asparagus steaming, or you can have it in the oven. I usually like to roast the asparagus in the oven at about 370, 375 degrees with a little bit of olive oil, salt, and pepper on them, just on a baking tray lined with some parchment. That with this here is a great keto-friendly meal. One of my favorites also is to serve it with a bit of spätzle. For our German and Austrian friends out there, if you never had spätzle, it's basically a German sort of pasta. It's also one of my wife's favorites, so we'll serve that with a little bit of butter. And with this sauce, it's fantastic. It's a nice dish. This is fine on the stovetop here for another minute or so, and then we'll give it a quick temp. Okay, so now off the heat, we're going to add just a little bit more butter, just to add a little bit of extra richness and flavor, but really what it does is just kind of helps thicken up the sauce. Now keep in mind that this exact same recipe, you could have done it with a 6-ounce steak or a chicken breast or anything like that. The technique is really what matters more than the recipe. So if you learn the technique, then the recipe is applicable for just about everything. So let's take a little bit of this. I got my mushrooms on there already. I'm going to get a little bit more sauce. And some of you might remember a chef called Graham Kerr. He was the Galloping Gourmet when I was a kid. I used to love watching him because he was the best taster of the bunch by far. What he would do is he would go up into the audience, so he'd run up into the audience and he'd pick out usually a young lady to join him for dinner. He'd pour a glass of wine, and then he'd take a bite of the food, and he did it like almost like it was in slow motion, where he would just take it. I'm gonna put it up with the melting here, and it would just savor every bite of it. It just looks so unctuous, so delicious. I gotta try another little piece here. It's very good. Beautiful tarragon. Beautiful tarragon flavor. Really makes the dish. Super moist and tender. Fantastic way to cook. All right. So remember, when you're joining me, you're also joining all of your foodie friends every time that you tune in. So why not give them a call maybe and watch the show together? I'm Chef Michael. Keep surfing the web. Until next time, hang loose.